Hello. I want to tell you a very different story. I think I prepared the wrong speech for tonight. It seems to be a very different atmosphere. When Cora asked me to do this, she asked me to just speak about some of the things she's heard me speak about in the past. And it's about, I guess, how a book changed my life, or has kind of stayed with me all along. So when I was and I hope some of these are lessons I got from this book that I still get from the book, and I hope they'll help you, maybe not, but I wanted to share them with you. So I grew up the road in Clonmel, just below Slievenamon, that hill that there's a song written about. And there was no internet, obviously, back in the middle of the last century when I was young, but there was a library, and I became an avid reader in the library. And what I really got into was explorers. Got reading about explorers, and I loved it. And I wanted to be one. So I went up to the librarian one day and asked her about the books, because all these guys in it had letters after their names. They were fellows of the Royal Geographical Society, and Lord this and Lord that. So I went up to the librarian at the age of 10 and I said, how would I become a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, and where is there a club in Clonmel? And would they sponsor my expedition up Slievenamon? She looked at me and she said, listen boy, that's not for you. To be a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society or become a mountaineer, and that, you have to be wealthy. You have to have explored new countries, discovered new species, and gone to universities. And that's not for you. So I was dejected. But I kept reading. And one of the most fundamental books, or most important books I read, was about Shackleton, Ernest Shackleton. Ernest Shackleton was an explorer in the early 1900s. And back then, he had been to the Antarctic. The North Pole had been reached and the South Pole had been reached. But the next big challenge in the Antarctic was to cross it. Thousands of miles. Snow, ice, and mountains. And he wanted to lead an expedition to there. And I got really inspired by this story. I was positive I could do it. I became really passionate about it. And persistent, so persistent, I actually went into training in Tipperary for the Antarctic. Now, I know we've no glaciers, but I had a pair of wellies and a duffel coat I got for Christmas. I was stuck for a sleigh, but luckily enough, it was my sister's pram. So I got the pram, the duffel coat and the wellies, and so I rounded up the neighbours' dogs. I tied them to the front of the pram, but it was a bit light. So what all explorers need is a good rucksack to weigh the sleigh down, and I didn't have that. But what I did have was a sister. And to me, she was about the right shape and the right weight. So in she went into the pram. Now, she's not here tonight, but if you ever do meet her, don't believe a word she said. She got into that voluntarily. And she insisted on being tied in for her own safety. And I was just ready to go when out walked the neighbour's cat. The dogs saw the cat saw the dogs, and that was the last I saw of my sister. But she was easy to find because her screams could be heard for miles across the fields. That night, I got into big trouble, and Shackleton's books were banned from the house. That's the funny part. Almost true. She wasn't tied in. Almost true, but it caused years of conflict with my dad because all I ever wanted to be was a mountaineer or an explorer or a scientist, one of these people. And he said to me, Shackleton was a failure, an absolute failure. He got to the Antarctic and the ship got crushed on the ice and he never even got to walk across the Antarctic. And he told me I would be a failure if I tried to follow in his footsteps and be an explorer or a mountaineer. I should cop on and get a job. Now, luckily for me, I never gave up my dream. And actually, when I even told my friends at school and teachers, they all said, get real. To be one of those, you have to be rich. You have to be wealthy. You have to have so much money you can have leisure like that. Luckily for me, in the late 70s, when I left school, there was no jobs. The economy was gone. It was the best thing ever happened to me. So I had nothing to lose. So I left Clonmel and I left Ireland as quick as I could, and I went off to climb mountains. I did what I had to do. I dug trenches in fields. I worked in shops. I did any job I could so I could climb at the weekends. And eventually, during those climbs, in those mountains, in the Alps and the Pyrenees, Scotland in winter, I began to meet other people who did the same thing, who were also passionate, they were positive, and they were persistent about getting their goals and dreams. And I soon discovered one of the secrets in life is to surround yourself with people with the same goals. And that was the first lesson I learned from Shackleton's book. If you want to achieve something, there's no point in being passionate, persistent, and positive unless you've got people around you who support you and believe in you. And once I got away from other people where I grew up who set limits for me, these new people I met didn't know who I was. They didn't care what education I had. They didn't care how much my dad earned. They had the same goal and they believed in me. And that was a valuable lesson. So I did become a mountaineer. I worked professionally as a mountaineer for 20 years after that. I did become a scientist. And I did become a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society. Despite all of that, I later moved on to working with multinational companies in teamwork and team building. And the one book that kept coming back to me throughout my life, even here tonight, I have it with me, was about Shackleton. And some of the 6 lessons that we teach in leadership and management, I think is also important for individuals, for us as individuals. And I want to kind of share those, if you don't mind, with you. They're so important, I've written them down so I won't forget them. So when Shackleton got to the Antarctic, the ship got crushed on the ice. Nobody knew this back in England. It was going to be 2 years until another boat arrived. They were going to run out of food. Half of it was gone down with the boat. He had a load of men to look after. And he turned that disaster into one of the most amazing stories of adventure, of rescue, and of survival. And it's still told today. So that disaster he turned into survival. And it's taught in business schools as well now. And what Shackleton says, and what we learn from Shackleton, is to be successful, not just in business, but I believe myself deep down in life, we must develop emotional intelligence. I think that's the first lesson for me that I felt I needed to learn from it. Emotional, and what I mean by that is we're not rational people, despite what they tell you. We're not rational. We're purely driven by emotion, I believe. It's our emotions drive us. But if we don't learn to control those emotions, we can make rash decisions or wrong decisions. And one of the things Shackleton displayed on that expedition, that even when things went wrong, he never made a decision in the heat of the moment. When he was overcome with emotion, he would let things calm and he would make a decision on an even keel. And for me, that's been an important one to struggle with. Not letting my emotions get me carried away. Now, tomorrow when Ireland are playing Wales in a rugby, it'll be forget that rule, okay? But that was the first one. And I think it's one of the things we have to learn and we have to help each other with is controlling our emotions and making rational decisions. The other one that leaders, that Shackleton said, was that when something goes wrong, positive people and leaders never think they've lost their ability. They never lose faith in their ability. They say circumstances have changed, but they never question their ability. Richard wrote about this last November in the Irish Times in the Startup Diary on the 1st of November, when he said that you get an idea, you trial it, the parts that go wrong, either you don't work or you change them. And through an iterative process, you keep changing and changing. He didn't question his ability. He just changed the process. And failure is actually part of getting things right. It's used a lot in startups now. Pixar movies use this. Fail fast and fail often. As Edison said, I didn't create the light bulb. I found 1,000 ways it didn't work. So he never questioned his ability. So I think that's an important lesson, that we all have abilities and we shouldn't let others knock our own ability. The third one is to be positive under pressure. And by what Shackleton meant with this was, we must always, positive people set goals for themselves. And they thrive under pressure. They thrive setting goals and motivating themselves to do other things. And because they believe in their ability and they have control of their emotions, these new goals challenge them and they learn from them. And they don't mind failing. So they're positive under pressure. They like being under pressure. They like the goals, they like the motivation. And that helps them to learn and grow mentally and socially. And one of the most important things for me, I think, the fourth lesson, is to give credit and some gratitude for those who actually do help you and are around you. And there's a great saying I like, that you can achieve an awful lot if you don't mind who gets the credit. So Shackleton, working with a team, would always credit the person. He would never take the credit. Joe Schmidt will never walk out at the end of a rugby match onto a pitch. Another great leader. He'll let the players get the credit. So if you credit the people that help you, if you don't mind who gets the credit, that ego is gone. We can achieve a huge amount. And I think we're held back by a society because we do care who gets the credit. And the fifth one, you'd be glad to hear I'm nearly finished. Always look on the bright side and be positive. Because positive people attract other positive people. And when you're positive, you're enthusiastic, people are willing to help you. Go the extra bit. Bring you the box of donuts for your workers. So being positive attracts other positive people. And people like being part of success. To say failure is an orphan and success has many parents. So being positive and being successful will attract lots and lots of other positive vibes and people willing to help you. And finally, positive people and good leaders, Shackleton said, are also learners and mentors. They always look for somebody else they can learn from. And they try to be with those positive, passionate, persistent people like themselves that they learn from. They look up to other mentors. But it's important to give back and help other people. Do the bit of social work, the bit of volunteering, and help people. We had a great event here last November, Mind Over Matter. And it was a great example of using this space, connecting with people to create a positive, inclusive society. Because I do believe being positive, being passionate, and being persistent is no good unless you're with the right people. And all people want is to be accepted, respected, and valued for who they are. I hope that's of some interest to you. It certainly has been a help to me. Thank you.